Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus was the founder of the Roman Empire, the man who began an iconic takeover of Europe and who evolved the structure of civilization. Although he never used the term emperor himself, it was under Augustus' rule that everything we associate the Roman Empire with occurred. It was he who dismantled the Republic, he who transformed 8 rigid governments into a long-lived superpower, and he who became head of a family that would produce the most famous rulers in all of history. This is the first emperor of the Roman Empire. The great Emperor Augustus was originally given the name Octavian at birth. He was born in the heart of Rome on the 23rd of September 63 BC. Octavian was a weak, sickly child who was overly attached to his mother, qualities that a typical Roman would frown upon. Throughout his entire life, he was riddled with illnesses that would repeatedly put him out of action for months or years, and even left him stranded at death's door multiple times. Octavian became a member of the board of priests, a hugely desirable position. But it would be the action of his great uncle that brought Octavian to power. While his great uncle Julius Caesar was in power, a struggle for Rome was reaching an epic climax. On one side, the general Pompey was trying to force Julius Caesar to give up governorship of Gaul. On the other side, Caesar and his fellow Roman general, Mark Antony, were trying to force Pompey out of politics. Caesar marched off to fight and left his successor, Mark Antony, in charge of Rome. Mark Antony was such a lazy fool and negligent leader that he almost caused a revolution during the short time that Caesar was away. Once Caesar returned in 46 BC, he sent Antony into exile. Due to this decision, Caesar needed a new heir. Octavian joined Caesar on the triumphal battles and was beginning to show promise as a worthy successor. This was until the great battle against the sons of Pompey in Hispania to force them out of politics. Due to Octavian's ill body and sickness, he was not able to go with his uncle Julius Caesar to fight. Although he had a valid reason for not going, the Romans saw it as cowardice and weakness. Octavian was so determined to fight that he mustered up a willpower that would impress most gods and forced his ill body out of his bed, left Rome, and rode out to Hispania to meet his great uncle Caesar in battle. Comedically, by the time he got there, the war was already over. However, the key point to this action was that Octavian had impressed his uncle and his followers by making the effort to assist the forces in his weakly condition. Then, on March 15, 44 BC, popular military leader Julius Caesar was called to a meeting of the Senate in Rome. This iconic part of history is where 60 conspirators took part in the assassination of Julius Caesar, where they stabbed the great leader a total of 23 times. The conspirators consisted of senators who resented Caesar's popularity and arrogance. But Julius Caesar's death had an opposite effect of what the senators had hoped for. In Julius Caesar's will, it was written that Octavian would become his adopted son. This was a big surprise, but a great decision from the late Julius Caesar, because due to his bad blood with Mark Antony, it meant Octavian was the sole person who Caesar could truly trust. Not only did this mean that Octavian would become Rome's new leader, but it also meant that he could now legitimately take on the great name, Caesar. Octavian received nearly all of Caesar's fortune. Once Mark Antony discovered this, it sparked a rivalry that would shape Rome's future for generations to come. Octavian was encouraged to flee Rome as it was incredibly likely that he was the next target. Octavian, Mark Antony, and a Caesar loyalist named Marcus Agrippa met on a small island in a river and spent 2 days hammering out a framework for their three-way alliance, an alliance that they anticipated would dominate Rome for the next 30 years. Then, in 42 BC, Octavian and Antony set out to battle a threat. This threat consisted of two previous Roman assassins named Cassius and Brutus who had fled from Rome. However, they hadn't just fled, they had actually gained control of huge territories that now threatened Rome's potential empire. Octavian, although suffering from his long-term ill body, managed to pull himself to lead his army in battle against the threat and came out victorious. Octavian took the head of Brutus, who ended his own life, and sent it back to Rome to be displayed to the people, announcing his victory. But when Octavian made it back to Rome, he was not there to celebrate. He was required to deal with the huge chaos caused by food shortages and riots. He also had to deal with retiring his own troops, now that the war was over, which triggered more riots. During this time, Mark Antony was off parading in the East, falsely playing the hero. But in 41 BC, it seemed Octavian was on the ropes. Mark Antony and his relatives, who were situated in Gaul, were trying to overthrow him. Gaul was a western area of Europe, encompassing what is now France, Belgium, Luxembourg, parts of Switzerland, the Netherlands, Germany, and the entirety of northern Italy. Octavian immediately marched to Gaul and decimated his rival and his relatives. Although this resulted in Antony laying siege to Rome, the end result was that Octavian had now also took back control of Gaul. Antony was sent away to the east and exiled. In the end, the boy wonder, Octavian, had overcome all who rebelled against him, while Octavian was feeling like he was on a hot streak. He then decided to finally defeat Sextus, Pompey's son. Sextus had far more experience and fight tactics, so actually ended up sailing rings around the boy wonder. Then, in 38 BC, Octavian almost died in a naval battle against Sextus. Once again, he was on the edge of death. Mark Antony saw this as an opportunity to repair his relationship with Octavian by offering him a trade of 120 battleships to aid his fight against Sextus in return for 4 of Octavian's legions. A legion is 3,000 to 6,000 troops, plus cavalry. Octavian ended up scamming poor Antony by welcoming his 120 ships, but did not send Antony any legions in return. Unfortunately for Antony, there was nothing he could do about it. By 36 BC, Octavian defeated Sextus with the help of his Roman general Marcus Agrippa. This left Mark Antony as the sole person left to oppose the boy wonder, Octavian. Antony was trying to overthrow Octavian by diminishing his claim as Caesar's only heir, but Octavian maintained the support of the people by throwing public games and spread propaganda about Antony going native and that he wanted to give Rome to the Egyptians. Then, in 31 BC, Octavian finally dealt with his ongoing issue of Mark Antony merely existing when a weak and desperate Mark Antony decided to send all of his remaining ships to attack. This was known as the Battle of Actium, a battle that became notoriously famous for how one-sided it was. Antony managed to escape once again, but this time he had lost everything. Octavian offered Antony's men to be spared if they switched sides. This once again solidified Octavian's respect from the people. That spring, Octavian's men advanced to Egypt for the final assault as Octavian himself joined his men and invaded Syria. While Octavian advanced into Egypt for the final assault that spring, Antony's men deserted one by one, which meant Octavian had a clear path to Mark Antony himself. However, by the time Octavian got there, Antony had committed suicide. And so, after a long-winded rivalry over many years, Octavian had finally silenced Mark Antony. Antony's wife and accomplice, Cleopatra, was paraded around the streets of Rome, naked and humiliated. After this, Cleopatra decided to share the same fate as her late husband by accepting defeat and committing suicide. After this, Octavian turned to the teenage Caesarion, the boy who Mark Antony claimed to be the true heir to Octavian's foster parent, Julius Caesar, and who was in fact the biological son of Julius Caesar. And so, Octavian decided to have the boy executed, eliminating his last potential rival. This meant that Octavian had beaten all of his immediate enemies. Octavian could now focus on developing, expanding, and advancing the Roman Empire. He would later become one of the greatest leaders in history. Loved by the Senate so much, he was awarded the name Augustus, to which he was then unknown by Caesar Augustus. Augustus claimed he acted for the glory of the Roman Republic, not for personal power. If you want to learn how Augustus shaped the Roman Empire and changed civilization, subscribe and hit the bell to avoid missing our video coming soon.